Don't you think it takes almost a David Lynchian sense of the absurd to deal with what's going on these days?
Yeah, I mean, what I think is a little bit, and this isn't just me being a Pollyanna, it's not that at all, but I think the failure of the imagination is the assumption of apocalypse, and I'm just bored, and I think we do start to manifest it or assume it. And I was like, what if we can hold this time period as like super challenging, super big market correction, environmentally, equity, all of it, but also like, oh, just entertain the idea. Like 30 years from now, it's like, that was such a hard time. And I think that the kind of laziness of like, it's so hard, it's just going to stay being hard. It's like, you know what? How about a little imagination?
Hello, Cleveland! Turn your speakers up to 11 because it's time for Too Much Effing Perspective, the podcast that asks musicians and entertainers to relive their most Spinal Tap moments when nothing goes right and everything gets kinda weird. I'm your host, Alan Keller, a comedy writer in LA and former lead singer of the least heralded Chicago band, The Falling Wallendas.
And I'm your co-host, Alex Hoffman, former tour manager for Radiohead and former lead singer of the least heralded Milwaukee band, The Vainglorious.
Our guest today is co-star of the current FX hit show, The Old Man, as well as past TV shows such as Judging Amy and NYPD Blue, and Michael Mann's cinematic masterpiece, Heat. Actor Amy Brenneman.
We talked to Amy about being the first person in network television history to take off all their clothes on screen, the embarrassment she felt trying to take a selfie with punk rock icon Patti Smith, and what it's been like to work with some of the greatest actors, including Jeff Bridges, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, and John Lithgow.
So, without further ado, let's go to the TMEP show!
It really puts perspective on things, though, doesn't it?
Not too much. There's too much
that's
perspective now.
Alex, when I started writing music back in the whatevers, I never heard of the word process before, but I had one. Aside from marinating in my favorite bands like Elvis Costello and the Attractions, Nick Lowe, Joe Jackson, Graham Parker and the Rumor, 10cc Queen, I carried a notebook around wherever I went, would write whatever lyric popped into my head. And I did the same with music, often just humming a melody into this tiny little tape recorder I had.
Yep.
And in the end, I would fill up dozens and dozens of notebooks, and they were jam-packed with scribbled lyrics, which I barely could read because I have such horrible penmanship. And sometimes, honestly, I would throw away the entire notebook because there was nothing worth saving. But every once in a while, there'd be a gold mine, and I would go back and I would piece together the best lyrics with the best music. And, it was kind of a ramshackle process. But in the end, I probably wrote hundreds and hundreds of songs.
It sounds like you had a process, as ramshackle as it may have been. And I was similar. I had notebooks full of lyrics. I had one of those mini cassette recorders. In fact, I even left one out in the rain one time overnight. And when I went to find it, I just took it and I poured the water out of the speaker and hit the play button and it fired right back up. So
that's how most Guided by Voices albums are made, Alex. So I think you're onto something.
Little did I know.
Well, I'm always interested in how different artists create what they do. For example, my wife Lois is an amazing fine artist, and her process for one of her projects was to cut up Trader Joe's bags and only using the print that's on the bag itself to create these incredibly accurate portraits of people. And she was so good that she got hired to do a portrait of Jessica Chastain and Gary Oldman and even got to present her work to them in person.
Yeah, no one's art looks like hers and her art doesn't look like anybody else's. It is truly unique.
Agreed.
To your point, there's more to a process than just physically making the art. There's also a mental component to it as well. And many people who are high performing in a range of things, whether it's high performing athletes or creatives or other things, they have a process.
It's interesting because now that I've moved on from music to writing screenplays, I sometimes get lost in whether I have a process or not. But what I do is I sit down every day and I just bang my head against the desk and eventually something falls out of it. I was in a writing group with a bunch of people and my friend Dylan Brody, he said to me, you think you're procrastinating and you think you're not focusing. Actually, all that to him is process. Process is whatever you do in your life, whether it's watching TV, whether it's taking a nap, whether it's playing a game. I mean, eventually that filters through your brain box and gets distilled into whatever's on the page.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've come up with a good justification for the time you spend on the Oculus.
Absolutely. And I'm going to write it off on my taxes this year.
To say nothing of justified to Lois. But anyway, our guest today, actor Amy Brenneman, talks to us about her process, such as how she prepares for the character she plays, and as well as her endless fascination with the processes of the amazing artists that she gets to work with. She even shares a story about comparing processes with her friend and rock and roll legend Stephen Stills, from the band, of course, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and Young.
Right? We got to get to this because this is a really, really interesting conversation that I think covers areas that we haven't on this show before.
So up next, our conversation with Amy Brenneman. But first, a short break.
And now someone who could run so fast that Heat director Michael Mann had to tell her to slow down so Robert De Niro could catch her, actor Amy Brenneman. So Amy, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. I just want to say that your name gives me PTSD. And I'll tell you why. When I was in college, every morning at 6 a.m., this is at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, where Alex went as well, some big northern Wisconsin guy named Zablu would wake us up at 6 in the morning with the Pure Prairie League song, Amy, what you want to do? And if I said something, he would throw a Bowie knife at my door.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it was very traumatic. So you can't hear that song without going immediately into the fetal position.
All right. I think it's spelled differently for me, if that helps at all.
Well, how could it be spelled? A-I-M-E?
A-M-I-E, I think. Yeah. It's bullshit, you know.
Yeah, it's a bullshit thing. I'm Alan, and people do A-L-A-N, and I'm like, no, that doesn't work.
Yeah, right.
You are in a great show, The Old Man, with everyone's favorite Jeff Bridges, right? Now, I'll just tell you my Jeff Bridges story because it's Shannon related. So Shannon Warner is a friend of Amy and mine. She actually connected us, and Shannon basically plans all these events for the Emmys and the Oscars. And Shannon is so cool that she will have me go and treat me like I'm Amy Brenneman. She'll put me in the green room and whatever. So I once went with a friend of mine, David Lasher, and David was actually in White Squall with Jeff Bridges, a Ridley Scott film. And so Jeff was coming there that day, and David introduced me to Jeff Bridges. And Big Lebowski is number one all-time favorite movie. Could watch it every day. So I was really happy to meet him. And he goes, Alan Keller. I knew a crazy guy named Alan Keller. And then he proceeded to tell me about the guy above me on IMDb, Alan Keller, who was like a cowboy actor. And what was so cool about it was he met him on, what's the Michael Cimino film that he was in? That
Heaven's Gate.
He was in Heaven's Gate. Alan Keller was.
Amazing.
How is it to work with Jeff Bridges?
It's heaven. It's just heaven. I mean, there's a million things to say about him, but he's just one of the most loving and supportive. You just feel seen, you feel loved, he's interested in you. I get a little special time because I'm his gal in the show, but I think the craft service feel that way. It's just how he walks through the world. Deeply creative. And Lithgow is the same way, John Lithgow.
Right.
There's so many, sadly, too many examples of toxic masculinity and what does it look like to be a good man? It's like, these guys are good men. That's how you do it. That's how you do it. And that's how you also behave as an artist. These guys, if they're not acting, they're composing. If they're not composing, they're painting. If they're not doing it themselves, they're encouraging you. It's like this water wheel of creativity and lifey connection. It's really awesome. And then it's just fun. It's just plain fun. And when we're talking to each other, we're really, really talking to each other. I mean, we love each other. We started saying I love you within weeks. And there's just this unbridled affection and appreciation. And that was before he almost died twice. So now it's even deeper. And yeah, it's weird. It's like, we laugh about this on The Old Man because I got this gig 4 years ago. There's only 7 episodes that have ever aired.
Right.
We had COVID. We had Jeff's lymphoma. We had Jeff's COVID. And then we had the strike. So
yeah, wow.
But during that time, Jeff had his struggles. My mom passed away. all sorts of life has happened. And like I always say to Jeff, we talk, and also we have both very interested in spiritual practice and just have a lot of crossover that way. So we'll be having these conversations and then the cameras will roll and it's almost annoying. It's like, oh, right. Oh, that's right. It's just so beautiful. It is so beautiful. And also his physical presence. I mean, there's a reason he was so good in Big Lebowski. I crawl on his lap. It's like we play with the
He's a big guy.
Rottweilers. It's like the physicality and the generosity of, and also, this is the last thing I'll say, although I could go on and on. You know, he's been married to Sue forever. He's got 3 daughters. It's not like he loves women. It's like he is a woman. You know, his male and female energy is so beautifully calibrated that he's just available.
I haven't met many truly charismatic people in my life. And what you said was very true. Charismatic people make you feel like you're the only person in the world. I met Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was like that. I met this guy, Dennis Frankenberry, an ad guy who ended up killing someone in a vehicular manslaughter case. So just because someone's charismatic doesn't mean they're a great person, right?
Yeah. Donald Trump is charismatic, you know? I think the thing about Jeff is he knows what that is. He knows what it is and he knows how to use it, right? I mean, I think you can use charisma for very nefarious purposes. I mean, the other interesting thing is I come from lawyers. I mean, I was always in theater, always loved it, but it's like to make a profession was sort of a rebellious thing. It's an irresponsible thing, you know, and it had a certain kind of neurotic, like, you know, fuck you. And I was talking to Jeff. I was like, oh, your dad was Lloyd Bridge. You didn't have that. And he's like, no. I was like, what did your dad say about acting? He's like, it's really fun, Jeff. You should try it. Like, there's nothing neurotic about it. I mean, he said I did have to have that moment because a success came to him very early on where he's like, this is too easy. I'm not that into it. It's my dad's field, for him to claim it for his own. So he had that journey. But in terms of rebelling against anything, it's like being a creative person is a valid thing to do. You can make a living and it's a beautiful way of life, like rather than what the lawyers say about it, who are probably just jealous.
Yeah. To circle back to the theme of this show and Spinal Tap moments, can you share with us a Spinal Tap moment with Jeff Bridges?
Oh, yeah, I can actually. So I was in a scene with Joel Grey and Jeff and John and the 2 Rottweilers.
And for our listeners who may not know, and I didn't either, Joel Grey is a celebrated actor of the stage, screen, and TV who is probably best known for having won an Oscar in the early 1970s for his role as the over-the-top master of ceremonies in the film Cabaret.
Yeah. Joel is incredible in every way, and he's 92. So he needs teleprompters, no problem. So they had 3 teleprompters. One that would be for when he's looking at Jeff standing, and then one teleprompter for Jeff sitting, and then another for John Lithgow who stands. I don't say a lot. I mean, I was kind of on his axis, so he didn't need one for me. And the Rottweilers. And it's the first day of the writer's strike. So we don't have our producer. I mean, we had a director, we had the crew, you know, but it was so in retrospect, how you really should use teleprompters is Jeff and John probably shouldn't have even been in his eye line because to get the shot, he should look right into the teleprompter, right? But, you know, Joel's a good actor and he wants to connect with his fellow actors. I know that feeling. So Jeff would say his line and then Joel wouldn't look at the teleprompter. So Jeff, because he's a mensch, would be like, no, Joel, you got to look at the teleprompter. Also super respectful, like never, it's like, an old guy. It's like, no, it's Joel Grey, you know? So he's like, but Joel, I'm going to say my line, but then don't look at me anymore. You know, just look at the teleprompter. So I'm watching this circus of Jeff Bridges going like, well, blah, blah, blah. And then like putting his hood on and like dropping to the floor and like pointing like, Joel, that one. And then I'm like trying to be really serious and do my part. And then the dogs were there and we're hanging on by a thread. And everybody's sort of tense, but laughing, but tense. And then there's a shot of me, a profile, Joel, and me into the dogs. And the dogs are supposed to be like, you know. So I'm acting up a storm, and I hear the director giggle. She's not a giggler. And then finally she's like, we have to cut because as I'm acting up a storm, the dogs are going down on each other. Like there was this whole, like, apart from Joel Grey and the teleprompters, just the dogs having mayhem.
Perfect.
So yeah, you do what you do. And I was like, I hope for a bunch of reasons, mainly because our writer wasn't there, John Steinberg, who I adore. I was like, hey, maybe we'll reshoot that episode because I didn't feel great. And they're like, no, it came out really well. Oh, there you go. That's the beauty of editing.
That's an awesome story. So I'm friends with someone you may know who speaks highly of you, Jeff Hansen.
Oh, Jeff Hansen. He probably was there.
Yeah, I got to get the other side of that. Yeah, teleprompters are interesting. I was in a band called the Falling Melendas, and half my bandmates joined Brian Wilson afterwards. So I got to go to Japan with Brian Wilson. Brian uses teleprompters for the entire show.
But probably knows how to use them.
I don't know about that.
Oh.
This is Brian Wilson. I'm not sure he understands it. He might not even realize it's there. He might just think it's words in his head.
I think Axl Rose was using teleprompters 30 years ago.
True?
I'm almost positive.
You did something in NYPD Blue that was kind of breakthrough at the time. You had a love scene, and I'm not so amazed by the love scene part, but that you had to have it with David Caruso. That freaks me out a little bit. Yeah,
that's groundbreaking.
So tell us about, how did you prepare for that, and how strange was that in your performance career?
Well,
sorry, Amy, before you say that, could you just actually tee up what that was?
I'm the first person to take their clothes off on network television ever. Like, I'll tell my grandkids.
Wow.
Yeah. So basically, NYPD Blue was pre-streaming. So it was network. It was standards and practices that we all grew up with. But Stephen Bochco and David Milch, who had created Hill Street Blues and LA Law, and they just wanted to make more adult fare. So they didn't even really know what they would be able to get away with. But when I got the job, we had to sign this nudity waiver, like basically we'll get naked. I wasn't too worried because I was like, well, I know standards and practices. So whatever they're going to shoot, they're not going to be able to show it all. But we did shoot it all, right? So we shot this love scene over the course of, I don't know, like 2 or 3 days. And I don't know where that footage is. It's probably somewhere in Sweden.
Black and white.
Yeah, but it just sort of went on. And Caruso was, it's weird. Like his kids ended up going to school with my kids here in LA. Wow. He was a very unlikely romantic lead. I had done a little bit of television, but I had just come from New York. I'd been playing St. Joan at Yale when I got cast. So while I hadn't done like love scenes and a lot of camera work, theater people, we take our clothes off all the time. I mean, it was like not a big deal. I was constantly doing weird things and I felt very comfortable in my body and very curious about the whole kind of art form. So I didn't think of it as transgressive and groundbreaking as it was, but then it was a thing. And so you had markets that didn't want to air it. And you had me and David on the cover of Entertainment Weekly, like, you big sluts are going to go to hell or whatever. But I like controversy. That's what I'm in it for. I'm always interested in cultural conversation. So yeah, we got naked all the time. I mean, honestly, but that was also, I was falling in love with my husband. It was like, there was a lot of nakedness at a certain moment in life, Should I get naked right now?
Our podcast audience would really appreciate that. Yeah. There was something I wanted to ask in the context of NYPD Blue. Amy, your character was Janis Lekalski. Am I pronouncing the last name correctly?
Lekalski, I think. Yeah, I think I was Polish descent.
Right, Lekalski. We're from Wisconsin, hey, so there's a lot of skis. So Janis was a big presence in the first season.
Yeah.
And into the early part of the second season, and basically being sentenced to prison was Janis's kind of off-ramp from the show, right? Yeah. And I've always been curious about the Spinal Tap moment of getting the script, paging through, and also going like, wait, where's Janis? I'm not seeing Janis beyond episode 4 or whatever it is.
Oh, no, that wasn't a Spinal Tap moment. That was getting fired off a show moment. Okay, so yes, in the pilot of NYPD Blue, I got naked and shot 2 men point blank in the face. It was a very splashy introduction. David Milch was always, still is interested in the gray areas, and, he'll quote Dostoevsky and things I've never read, but he thinks I did. So I did it because my father was a bad cop. I can't even remember now, but I sort of did it to protect him. So basically what happened was that storyline concluded in the first third of the first season. And then they were going to fold me into other storylines, like I'm a cop. And apparently the audience was like, that chick never went to prison. We saw her shoot those guys. And I know now as a creator myself, it's like, oh, right. Like that character doesn't easily segue. But I think that if Caruso had stayed on the show, I was so connected with him, I think I would have come back as a whatever periodic person. But the funny thing, what I thought you were going to bring up was because David flamed out, it was very dramatic and he wanted more money and they wrote him off the show, too sweet, right? But in my storyline, it's like, you're going off for 6 months, but with good behavior, blah, blah, blah. So the idea, again, if David hadn't flamed out, I would come back. So I will get hardcore fans say like, what happened? I was like, I must have been really bad in prison. It was supposed to be 6 months.
Oh my
but
God.
I had already started doing movies, and honestly, I love doing that show. But I ran a theater company before I started doing TV, so partly I wanted a bigger part, and partly I wanted to be part of the leadership.
Cool.
Amy Brenneman, what is your favorite scene in the movie This Is Spinal Tap?
There are so many, but probably when they can't find the stage. I just know as a performer that feeling. It's like, ah!
Has it ever happened to you before?
Yeah. Oh, constantly. What's weird on a sound stage, as well, like there are sets, but then there's usually like black curtains as well. So I often cannot find my way to the actual outside. And I live in Southern California where there are earthquakes. So I have had that experience. There's a very funny clip of me on camera during Judging Amy, me and Richard T. Jones, when there's an earthquake. And you see the look on both of our faces. I feel like true to gender stereotypes, I stay really calm and I don't leave. And Richard, of course, because he's a human, is like, what the hell? Just like exit frame. I was like, I cannot break character, even though there's an earthquake.
He ditched you?
He ditched it. He saved his own hide.
Yeah, he's the guy you want in the exit row in front of you on an airplane, right? He's like, get out first.
Yeah, to show the way.
We've never really talked about earthquakes here. We all live in Southern California. Well, Alex used to live in Southern California. Let's share our most harrowing earthquake event. Amy, what would yours be? Were you here during the 92 or 94 quakes?
94. Yeah, I had kind of just moved here from New York, and I was in the Hollywood Hills. I lived in this guest house that looked really spindly, those houses with like a little spindle. I didn't know those houses are often very sturdy because those spindles go into bedrock. They're not as spindly as they look. I had been dating who is now my husband for a couple months, and I had his dog. He was up in the Bay Area at ILM. He's directing a movie. And I woke up, and it was a pretty gentle. It was not violent, but it was long. And it went on so long where I very calmly thought, well, if this keeps going, that's it. So I'm very proud of this, actually. I started to get my mental house in order. I was like, thank you. I love you. And it's almost like in retrospect, when I didn't die, clearly, that I thought, oh, wow, I got to that point, So it wasn't like things weren't banging off the wall. It just wouldn't stop.
Yeah.
Just wouldn't stop.
I didn't live through the biggie, but there was one that was pretty large. I remember it was really strange because it looks like there's a big wave happening in your living room.
I like that feeling, though, of the earth moving. I mean, I'm a New Englander, so I didn't grow up with it. But it's like, it's so the earth moves under your feet. I was like, yeah, it's moving all the time. Psychologically speaking, it's like it does not throw me.
Alex and I are from Wisconsin. We grew up with tornado warnings, and it's a recurring nightmare of me in my backyard holding on to the post and just flying in the wind. I've had it ever since I was a kid, always been kind of panicked by tornadoes.
They seem terrifying to me. I have a really good friend out here, a mom friend who's from Wisconsin. And so we have, it's like one of those, like, would you rather be boiled in oil or crocodiles? And so like the earthquakes versus tornadoes, because to me, tornadoes seem really terrifying. But she does say there are warnings, whereas earthquakes just come out. I was like, okay, that's valid. I get it.
For me, in junior high school in Wisconsin, I was part of something that was almost like B-roll from The Wizard of Oz. We were in our basement looking out the window, and we saw our garage lift off the ground and smash into the tree in our backyard.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Where? Beaver Dam or Green Bay?
Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. The tornado came right up the street and...
Beaver Dam.
Beaver
That
Dam.
sounds like a stripper name.
Home of the Golden Beavers.
Well, home of the Golden Beaver. I feel like at my age, that would be the category I would be in, the Golden Beavers.
Amy, you were in the classic 1995 Michael Mann action flick Heat, starring De Niro and Pacino. I was wondering if you had any Spinal Tap moments during that shoot.
So, for those that know that movie, there's the endless thing where I'm sitting in the car and waiting for Bob and he goes to kill people and stuff. And so there's like night shoots for, I don't know, it felt like 2 weeks, felt like a really long time. And it's like Michael Mann is a beautiful, incredible filmmaker, but you feel a little bit melodramatic because you're just like making faces. There's nothing new that's happening. So I had done my part. Anyway, it was Bob's close-up. And I do remember we were connected enough at that point where I was like, okay, I want to be a good scene partner. So I was off camera, but I sort of like put a face on. And then he literally goes like, I'll just do it. And I did not take offense. I was like, I know, that didn't help you, did it? Because there's sometimes, let me just do it. Like, I'll just imagine it. And, my bad acting. That's how good I am.
That's hysterical. Well, I have a De Niro story too, which kind of augments our little personality sketch of him here. Comes from my friend Tracy Newman, who is one of the founders of the Groundlings Comedy Club, also was the co-creator of the show According to Jim. And Tracy also happens to be the older sister of Lorraine Newman, who was one of the original Not Ready for Primetime players on Saturday Night Live back in the Belushi, Aykroyd, Gilda Radner days. Anyway, so Tracy had come to New York to see the show, and there was an after party, and she saw her sister, Lorraine, talking to some nondescript fella. She walked up, and Lorraine immediately ditched the guy with her. And so the guy is lethally boring, and she's listening to this guy tell stories and trying to figure out how to get away from him. And then he flashes a smile, and she's like, wait a second. This guy who had been introduced to her as Bobby is Bob De Niro, her favorite actor. So it just goes to show, out of character, he's very unassuming, let's say. Any more Spinal Tap moments with De Niro? I mean, all your scenes are with him in Heat, right?
Yeah. I try to run away and he tackles me on that. Oh, that's actually a really quick story, which is I was a runner till my knees gave out. I ran. I'm in good shape. I'm younger than he is, blah, blah, blah. So we're doing that scene. It's like I'm running away from him, and I easily ran away from him.
Oh, no.
And Michael's like, I think you have to act this part. So I'm like acting really upset, but I'm like, I could outrun this guy like on this hill. No, I mean, the thing about him is I'd done NYPD Blue, I'd done a couple of movies, but I still had done much more theater than camera work. And so I still had the thing of it's a performance, right? I'll learn my lines and I come in and I'm a well-behaved person and film is expensive. So it's like, you want to have your shit together. Now I think doesn't cost anything to just like behave in front of the camera. But I remember he would, he was totally prepared, but had his lines in his suit jacket. So at one point he forgot his lines, no shame there. And a normal person would be flustered or call cut or something. And he's like, hold on. And the cameras are rolling. And that was like this aha moment, which I thought of a lot when I had my own show, because I'm like, you are so relaxed. You don't change, whether the camera's on you, off you, on, off. And I remember thinking you only get there if you're lucky enough to be in front of the camera all the time. And that's how I got on Judging Amy.
Really?
you're on camera all the time. You don't even have the energy to perform. So it just sort of flattens the jacked upness.
Interesting.
Because to your friend's point, he's extremely unimpressive. But then I'm like, oh, you know this art form probably better than anybody.
Yeah.
You know what editorial is. You know what the gold is in front of the camera, which is not what we think it is, my fancy ideas about a scene. It's literally, can I tolerate just being observed? And he has practiced that.
I think Edward Norton told this story on Letterman about doing a scene with De Niro and Marlon Brando, and De Niro literally falling asleep while the scene was being shot.
Yeah, it's like you're just, Bob does not do a lot of romantic leads. So I think he was a little vulnerable, right? He had to be handsome. He had to work out. And I was 20 years younger, whatever I was. So it was cool. He might have been out of sight of his comfort zone, his normal lane, a villain, right? I mean, he was villainous action hero, but he also had that tender stuff that Michael Mann demands of his male heroes.
You and I share, Amy, a love for a certain musical act, and you're also friends with someone in the band, Crosby, Stills, Nash. Maybe you include Young in there. I'm not sure I do. But you're friends with Stephen Stills, right?
I am.
My daughter, we went to the orientation at Oakwood, and I remember in front of me was like a Civil War soldier or something. I'm like, what the hell is that guy? And he has a kid that's going to Oakwood. He looks like 170 years old. And then he turned around and his name tag was upside down. And I'm like, oh, fuck, that's Stephen Stills.
Well, it's funny to your point of him being old to have younger kids. So for about a couple years, like most wannabe hippies, like all of us ended up at the Waldorf School here in the Valley. And my daughter was in kindergarten. And then I was in the baby class with my son, Bodie. And with Charlotte, I had been working all the time on Judging Amy. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to do all the things that I couldn't do. So I was in this baby class, and there was this beautiful blonde woman with a cute baby and a really super cute blonde guy with a baby. The woman was Stephen's wife, and Oliver. So Oliver and Bodie are basically the same age. But the cute guy was Chris Stills, who's also a friend of mine, who's Stephen's adult son, but it's a rock and roll family. So the uncle is younger than the cousin. You know what I mean? I was like, we don't do this in Connecticut, you know?
That's crazy.
But we immediately became friends. I'm really good friends with Chris, who's also an incredible musician. But the cool thing, to your point, is I was an au pair in Paris when I was 17 and fell in love with Four-Way Street. I mean, just like I listened to it on repeat all the time. I know all the banter, blah, blah, blah. So Kristen said, and this was after Judging Amy was over, but when Stephen would be on the road, he watched Judging Amy all the time. I was like, what? Like, that is not the demographic. But there was something, he liked me, he liked Tyne, he liked the grounded, again, kind of what we were saying, like when he was on tour and feeling lonely or whatever, it's like a family feeling. So when we met for the first time, it was just one of those artists' little antenna moments. I was like, I listened to you to create the scene that moves back to you. You know, like we're just all vibing off each other all the time. And
That's interesting.
Neat.
So we've just stayed really good friends, and he married this wonderful woman. I actually married Chris and Stacy. Like I got the little minister for the day thing up in Ohio.
You're kidding.
Yes. And what I love also, I did a play recently at the Pasadena Playhouse here, and Stephen came to see it. And in the creative process, I was like, oh my God, can I talk to you? Even though it's different, you know, I'm an actor, he's a musician, but I was like, so this is the way I'm working. And he's like, oh yeah, totally. And I just love talking process with people. And it's so idiosyncratic and universal at the same time. So yeah, I'm like what is it? Cousin Oliver on the Brady Bunch or something. I'm like a cousin of the Stills family.
Well, it's funny. I had a similar thing with Rod Stewart was a dad at Sunnyside Preschool, which is where I met Shannon. And one day I dropped off my daughter. It must have been 8 a.m. And I'm in the parking lot and I'm looking at my phone. And then I look to my right, and in this SUV is Rod Stewart in like a full shamrock tuxedo. And again, it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. But what's funny about what you're saying about Chris is that Rod Stewart's kids were also parents in the same school. So his grandson was in the same class as his daughter.
I mean, I can't keep up.
So this is something we've done in different variations with certain guests. And I think the one that comes to mind for me is we had Steve Turner from Mudhoney. We were talking about the Seattle grunge scene and sort of his interactions with various notable personalities from that era, whether it's Eddie Vedder or Courtney Love or Kurt Cobain or others. So I'd like to do something similar with you and just sort of think about people that you've interacted with, you've worked with, that are close with you. And let's start with Stephen Stills. Do you have a Spinal Tap moment with Stephen Stills?
Oh, I have a Patti Smith Spinal Tap, a really bad.
Let's do it.
Oh, it's still so. So Stephen and Kristen put together this thing called Light Up the Blues, which is a fundraiser for Autism Speaks, because they're not Oliver, but Henry's on the spectrum. And it's an amazing concert. It's where I met all my heroes, like Ricky Lee Jones and Lucille Williams and John Mayer, and watching Neil Young like work it out on. I mean, it's like I can't even believe it. So I would come out there and Jack Black would MC it and I would do whatever they needed me to do, right? So this one year, Kristen said, "Do you want to introduce Patti Smith?" I was like, "Oh my God, like, yeah, of course." So they're doing the pre-show thing, and it was the year or maybe the year after that Ellen DeGeneres hosted the Oscars and she took that selfie, right? So Kristen said, like, "Oh, we're going to do this fun thing. You'll come out and you have a selfie stick and then you and Patti will take a selfie with the audience." And I said, "Okay, cool. Have you told Patti?"
Oh, no.
And I never really got an answer, right? So I come out. I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm so honored to introduce our next guest, Patti Smith." And she comes out and I'm like, "Okay, we're going to take a picture." And she looks at me with ice publicly, like a public shaming moment.
Oh, boy.
And she's like, "I don't do that." And I'm like, "Oh my God." So I said, "Okay, like, it's totally fine." No, I don't even, it was horrible. I get off stage and I'm like shaking. I felt bad for her. I felt bad for me. I'm not mad at Chris. I'm like, what the fuck was that? And then I'm texting Brad, my husband. I was like, "Nobody saw it." He's like, "Well, no, I saw it." I was like, "Oh my God." No, it wasn't just in my head. So this friend of Kristen's who kind of helps out backstage, I was like, "Oh my God." She's like, "It's okay. Do you want to apologize or just check in with Patti at the intermission?" And I was like, "Yeah." So it's intermission. I'm still feeling really weird about the whole thing. Patti's talking to Neil Young. They're getting ready for after the intermission. And I said to her, like, "I'm so sorry. Obviously you didn't want to do that. I just, it wasn't really my idea, whatever." And then Patti's like, "It's totally fine." And then kind of looks up at Neil Young and goes like, "Look who introduced me." And then I thought, is she flirting with me? What is happening?
Oh my God.
I said, as long as it's fine with you. But it was that public moment. And also not really knowing the rock and roll scene, right? I kind of know my scene, but also I felt so uncool. Like, cool people don't do selfie. I don't know. It was horrible. And look, I still am sort of stuttering about it.
And you didn't throw Kristen under the bus because you sure should have.
I don't know. It was all so odd.
I would have.
Yeah.
How many times have I thrown you under the bus, Alex? Lots.
And vice versa.
But I love, I read Patti Smith. I just think she's an incredible writer. She has an incredible Instagram. But I always have a funny little private weirdness with her.
Yeah.
That's my own little Spinal Tap.
That's tricky, but that's funny.
Yeah.
And again, we're laughing about it now because
We're laughing now. Okay. God bless
Perfect.
you for helping me.
All right, two more of these. This is an actor that I feel like I've grown up with in certain ways. I mean, some of my earliest movie memories are from Sylvester Stallone and Rocky. So you were in Daylight with Sly. Any Spinal Tap moments with Mr. Stallone?
Oh, all. I mean, it's a disaster movie. We were shooting it in Rome. They built the Holland Tunnel in Rome, which was awesome, actually. It's like Poseidon Adventure. So basically the tunnel starts filling up at a certain point. We shot it from like August to February, so a long shoot. So the big thing is the water. I mean, it's so interesting what they would do digitally now. So the water was rising and they wanted to warm the water so that we wouldn't freeze, but it couldn't be too warm because then it would steam, right? So the air, they had to do that whole thing.
Right.
So this month of December where we were doing this whole sequence, and at the beginning of that sequence, they'd say, okay, we have a 20-minute, got to move the cameras. And then you'd go to your dressing room and pretend that you have something to do. But then honestly, by the time you took off the wet clothes and put on it's like, what, So Sly and I would just sit in the water. It was like a horrible hot tub that we would just sit and chat. And it was really beautiful. Because he thought the world of me was really sweet. And he would say, one day, he's like, okay, but I'll tell you what you got to do. Here's what you got to do. If you want to keep working, you got to keep them guessing. Do different things. I was like, okay. And then the next day, he's like, here's what you got to do. If you want to keep working in this business, you got to be known for the same thing, do the same thing. And then we got to the point where, and this is a really dear, because kind of before and after that time, it was like he was over there and I was over here. But there was this beautiful, it was like we were all at ayahuasca. And I would say, you don't know what the fuck to say, do you? That was actually his last action picture because his rotator cuff was messed up. He's like, I have made my living doing this thing that I can no longer do. And I don't know if I can act. He had this weird, honest, beautiful soul. I had the Rocky poster up when I was a kid. I was like, that guy is in there, this weird, bruised, heartbreaking, damaged male psyche thing, and then he got all muscled up and stuff, but I could glimpse it. But yeah, shooting in Rome was, it was great, but it was that dirty water. They should have called it Dirty Water.
That's an old 60s song.
Yeah.
Sly, he's got a new career now after Tulsa King, which is a really good show. And the documentary that's on, I think, Netflix is really good if you haven't seen it yet.
Oh, that's so good to know. It's funny, the whole De Niro was not like this. Needless to say, Jeff Bridges is not like, this is really my only time where it's he's got his entourage and he's got his bodyguard and he's got his whole thing. And I got the gig and then I was like, I have a wedding date. So I started shooting with the other part and then I went off to get married and then Sly was shooting. And anyway, it took a month or two before we started to do scenes together. So my husband, Brad, came over to Rome for a couple of weeks and then he went back to home in LA. And Sly, early date, we chit-chatted, but he was like, where's your husband? And I said, oh man, you already left, you already ditched me. And he looked at me and he's like, yeah, that can happen.
Whoa.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm totally joking. But it kind of broke my heart. You know what I mean? He would live in a world where you get married and a month later somebody splits.
You got to see the documentary because I like him a lot more after that. He had a difficult childhood. His relationship with his dad was really something else, and it really humanized him a lot. I recommend it.
I would like to see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, last one. 88 minutes with Al Pacino, an Al Pacino Spinal Tap moment.
Well, that was fun because we had crossed over in Heat, but I was on the De Niro team. 88 minutes, mostly I was nursing my son. The Spinal Tap moment with Al has to do with publicizing Heat. So Heat had come out here, then I didn't do too much promotion because nobody knew who it was. But then I was shooting that movie in Rome. So they said, oh, can you stop off in Paris and do some publicity with Al? So I didn't have my publicist with me, who I've known forever. I was talking to somebody about this. It's like doing publicity in a language you don't know, and you're just sort of hustled along. We didn't really know what was happening half the time. And also there are these weird hybrids that they don't really have here, but they have in France and Italy, where it's evening, but really hyped up. And then there's these weird cooking segments, things that don't go together. And then, it's what's happening? And very, very, very hyped up. So we're sitting there trying to figure out what the fuck was going on. And they're like, oh, Al, we're going to do this cooking sequence. So they whisk him over to this little kitchen area, and I'm just sitting on the couch back there. And they're like, okay, we're going to make this thing, and we're going to thing, and we did cook this sherry and have a fun drink. And then they keep pushing it on him. And suddenly I'm like, I think he's sober.
Wow.
Like, I don't think there was that thing that happens here when a publicist says blah, 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 or whatever,
Right,
But
right,
I'm
right.
like, oh, this is really after there. Come on. Like, don't be a party pooper.
Oh,
and
no.
it went on. This extended, it's like me and Patti Smith, this extended public moment. And then finally he was gracious and got over that. And he sat down and I said, like, can I ask you something? And he's like, yeah, I do not drink alcohol. That was really bad. Really public and live, like live television
Wow.
and completely unprotected. And,
Oh my God.
sort of like what I was saying about Jeff, like my treasured memories are like shooting the shit with these legends. And he said this thing to me, which I took as the greatest compliment, because we were talking about fashion or red carpet or kind of this moment that we're in of branding and being an actress, but selling perfume. And I've never had a head for any of that stuff. And in fact, I kind of see acting as like, how much stripped down can you be? How unglamorous are you willing to go? And he said, oh, you're like a 70s actress. You're like Ally McGraw and Jill Clayburgh. And I was like, oh, that was cool.
I want to go back to the movie Heat for a second. It's, I believe, the only movie where Pacino and De Niro share a scene together. I mean, they're in The Godfather, but they're not in any overlapping scenes.
Yeah.
And in general, I think, my opinion, Pacino sucks in Heat. He's got that scent of a woman, over-the-top, bombastic vibe that is completely out of character with every other performance in the movie. But in the one scene with De Niro, he toned himself down as if he realized he couldn't be so obnoxious when he's acting with a peer like De Niro. But in the rest of the movie, he's almost laughably bad.
No, he's on a thing. I know.
Yeah.
Well, and it was funny too, because I remember the read through for Heat. They tell you where to sit. It's like a Thanksgiving dinner. So I'm like obviously on Team De Niro. And even all of us felt like, what are you doing over here? Like, we're just reading. But you know what? I think artists need to self-stimulate. I don't know. I'm sure music is like this too, all art forms, but it's like those big impulses. It's like, I gotta get it out of my body, right? But then you get it out of your body. And is it really useful? Is it telling the story? Hopefully you have a good actor or director or whatever. But yeah, you don't always want to go with those takes.
Well, Michael Corleone is the most downplayed character,
Yeah.
and it's brilliant. It's his best role, but he wins the Academy Award for Scent of a Woman, right?
Yeah.
Where he's way over the top.
Right.
So it's kind of a bad lesson. But Heat, I think that's the movie where you're a cop and you shouldn't be so big.
I know.
And he's so big in that.
Brad and I have, I think he's talking to Hank Azaria's character about Ashley Judd, maybe. But anyway, the line is, I can't remember. The line is something like, I don't know why I'm so confused. And Pacino's line is, because she's got a great ass and you got your head right up it. That is actually in our household sometimes. Like if our kids are freaking out.
Oh my God.
You got your head right up it. Like those like crazy eyes.
Well, Amy, this has been ridiculously fun.
You guys are awesome.
We want to know, for our listeners, do you have any web presence that you can give them so they can keep in touch with what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm most active on Instagram, which has all the link tree. So Amy Brenneman on Instagram. I have this new website. My old website crashed and was too old, but the new website is awesome, and it has every clip known to man. theamybrenneman.com. It's my name. It's nothing weird.
Got it. We've been with thee today.
And I got to thank Shannon Warner because this was a great hookup.
Oh, this has been a joy.
Listeners, it's a good day in the office here at the TMEP show when our guests are funny, generous with their stories, and grateful for the good fortune they've had in their careers. Let's just say that Amy Brenneman makes it one of those fine days. Too Much Effing Perspective is a Milwaukee Talkies original. Our editor is Gretchen Kilby. Our music composer is J.K. Harrison. Please follow us on Instagram at TMEP Show. Visit our website at tmepshow.com to sign up for our mailing list. And find our other episodes featuring rock stars, comedians, and entertainment luminaries whose bizarro stories we enjoy, we think you will too, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
Although it would be as great as having armadillos in our trousers, this podcast is not affiliated with This Is Spinal Tap, and no person or entity connected with the film has sponsored or endorsed its content. The podcast is not affiliated, sponsored, or licensed by Authorized Spinal Tap LLC or Century of Progress Productions.
Evergreen Podcast Network.